Hello students, my name is Gaurav Bansal. I teach Indian economy here at GS Core, and today we are going to start with the discussion on the budget. This discussion will also cover some aspects of survey because we will definitely be discussing some of the taxation number and some of the fiscal policy aspects, okay? And we will also cover some of the trend analysis. So today's session is going to cover this Union Budget 2023 as well as the certain aspects from the economic survey. We've already done one more video on economic survey. So those who have not yet seen that video, kindly check out that as well. That covers the broader theme of the economic survey. And in future, we will do 3 more videos which will be more about data analysis, scheme analysis and factual aspects from the economic survey. Now let us begin. So first of all, let us look at this budget profile. And if we look at the size of our budget, this is about 45.03 lakh crore. Okay, all the numbers here, they are in lakhs of crore. And if we have to understand it in dollar terms, then this would be roughly equal to $550 trillion. So the size of the budget is roughly $550 billion. And what is the size of our economy that we are expecting at this time? This is $3.5 trillion. $3.5 trillion are equal to 3,500 billion dollars. So if our national economy is about $3,500 billion, then the budget is equal to $550 billion. Okay. So this gives you a broader idea. And that means the budget is roughly 17 to 18% of the GDP. Okay, so you can understand how much of our GDP is affected by the government. Now, first of all, from where the money is coming for this much expenditure. This is a huge expenditure, and from where the money is coming and where it is going. And meanwhile, when I will discuss it, I will also do some trend analysis. So, more than half of this budget expenditure is going to be financed by the tax. Okay, so tax accounts for roughly 23 lakh crore rupees. Okay, so roughly about $280 billion. All of this will help you to put things in perspective. That's why I am converting them into smaller, easy numbers to understand. Okay. Now, because lakhs of crore, once it gets into that direction, it's very difficult to understand. So maybe some people find that easy to understand, but for me, I cannot get around lakhs of crore. It's too big a figure. Okay. And I'm not an physicist who has to deal with those big numbers. Okay, the galactical distances, the speed of light, and the astronomical units. Let's deal with the smaller numbers here. Now, the point is, more than half or roughly 23.3 lakh crore rupees are going to be coming from the taxation, and about 3 lakh crore rupees are going to come from non-tax revenue. And that means non-tax revenue in comparison to tax revenue is about 15%. Okay, so if we have to put this in perspective, then roughly NTR, this would be 14% of our revenue receipts, and tax receipts, they would be about 86% of our revenue receipts. 86 and 14. So that is how we are going to get the revenue. This is not a great number. Ideally, non-tax revenue should be contributing a bit more. But nonetheless, we have been able to improve it, and not a very bad sign. Ideally, what we would want is NTR to be contributing close to 20% of our revenue receipt. For those who do not really get the basic terminology, for them, let me simplify it in the beginning before we get ahead. What is revenue receipt? Okay, revenue receipt is my regular income for which I'm not taking a loan or selling anything. मतलब ये वो पैसा है जो इनकम का पैसा है, जिसके लिए मुझे उधार नहीं लेना पड़ रहा है या कुछ बेचना नहीं पड़ रहा है. That is revenue receipt. More and more money we want from revenue receipt. हम चाहते हैं हम जो खर्च कर रहे हैं उसका अधिकतम पैसा revenue receipts है. What do we want? We want that whatever we are spending, maximum amount of that we can get through revenue receipt. That is our objective. Okay. Now, in addition to this, we also have capital receipts. Okay. So, some part is the net tax receipts, and then we also have the capital receipts. What is capital receipt? Capital receipt is the money that is coming either in the form of loan or sale of assets, liquidation of assets. So bulk of it is loan. Now you can see if my budget is 45 lakh crore rupees, almost 18 lakh crore rupees. 18 lakh crore rupees out of that is roughly coming from loans. And in conversion terms, this would be roughly equal to $140 billion. That much loan we are taking. And that is a very big amount of loan, by the way. Okay. Out of this, market loans are 12.19, small savings state provident fund, they are 4.91. What is the difference? This comes from the consolidated fund of India. This comes from the public account of India. Government को तो सबके लिए interest pay करना है. Okay. So these are known as public account liabilities, and these are known as the public debt. So total loan that government is getting is roughly this much. Okay. So this gives you a broader idea that whatever we spend, a very big amount of that, okay, almost 30-35% of that is coming from the loans. We do not like this situation. We want our taxes to improve. Although in last 2 years our taxes have done very well, but still India has low tax revenue. We want this tax revenue to become at least 75% of our total expenditure. Then we will be in a good position. Right now, it's not a very good position. We want it to be more than that. So that is the situation. And I'm talking about the net taxes, not the gross taxes. Gross taxes are already 75% of the revenue, roughly 75 of the revenue. So you have got some idea here that what I am spending, for which, and for that from where the money is coming. Okay. So this budget that we have to pass, for that my income is only about 27 lakh crore rupees out of 45. Rest I am a bit dependent on the capital receipts. Not a great thing. So this is one aspect of our budget. Now let us look at where this money is being spent. Where this money is actually spent. So one of the big amount is going for interest payment. Okay. If we take the overall gross budget, then interest payment is about 10.80 lakh crore. Okay. So from the overall expenditure, the interest payment is about 23% or 24% perhaps, almost 11 lakh crore rupees out of 45 lakh crore. Roughly 24%, 23% is our interest payment. And why we have to pay so much interest? Because our loans are huge. Now let me simplify it. तब से हम क्या कहने की या क्या समझाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि हमारा बजट साइज बहुत अच्छा है. Our budget size is good. But उसमें प्रॉब्लम क्या है? What is the problem here? That a significant amount of what we are spending is coming in the form of loan. मैं जितना खर्च कर रहा हूं उसके लिए मुझे बहुत ज्यादा लोन लेना पड़ रहा है. वो अच्छी बात नहीं. क्योंकि मुझे उतना लोन लेना पड़ रहा है, तो जब मैं उस पैसे को खर्च करता हूं तो खर्च का भी एक बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा ब्याज के रूप में मुझे खर्च करना पड़ता है. So I have simplified a bit of it in Hindi. Now I will switch back to English and I will keep broadly the analysis in English. I will switch to Hindi in some places to simplify the things. And those who do not understand Hindi, they do not worry and should not worry because they are not missing out on anything. There is nothing exclusive which I've said it in Hindi. Now, getting back here. Now, from my budget, a bulk is spent on interest. Not a great thing. Not a great thing, because then that means I'm taking loan, I'm giving interest. A big size of the budget is caught into that only. Actual budget, which looks at my income and my spending, is much lower. Actual budget, which looks at my loans, if we take out loans and interest payment, then it is much lower. Okay? Budget size is big because we are taking big loans, we are making big interest payment. Not a very favorable situation. What we have to do for that? We need to be more disciplined. And it is not something that we can change in 1 year or 2 years. This takes decades. So ideally, what do we want? Ideally, we want that we will take loans, we will take limited loans. Loans should not be 20% of our budget size. 75% should be in the form of the taxes or non-tax revenue. 5% can come from sale of asset. That would be a very good type of situation. Okay, so for example here, if my budget size is 45 and I want to keep loans about 20% of it, that means my loan would be about $90 billion, okay, or $110 billion, not $140 billion, let us say. So something like that. So that would be more favorable situation. Right now we are taking much more loan that we want. And in fact, if loan can be lower, it would be even better. Now, let us analyze the budget further. So what we have identified, our loans are very big and our interest payment is also very big. Now let us leave that behind and talk about other things. The scheme expenditure is also significant. A big part of the budget is spent on the schemes, which is not a bad thing, because through schemes we introduce welfare, through schemes we create assets, and we create all kind of policies for people. So expenditure on scheme is actually a good thing. So centrally sponsored schemes, central sector schemes, centrally sponsored schemes, for example, MNREGAs. The scheme where center is proposing the schemes and states are implementing them. So center has to give money to state in order to carry them out. As I told you, MNREGAs is one of them. And center sector schemes. So we have the breakup here. Some of the scheme from here, there is some subsidy expenditure, there are economic services. So for example, all the education, health, okay, that comes here. Railways, okay, those big expenditures, they come here. Then general services, all the administrative services, that also comes here. And then we have some of the other breakups. So center sector scheme, on the one hand, they are certain routine expenditures, and on the other hand, they are also investments, particularly in education and health. Then about 25 lakh crore rupees, they are in the form of transfer, establishment and other expenditures. So establishment expenditure, for example, you have to spend certain money on states, you have to spend certain money on staff salaries and pensions. And similarly, we have the other capital expenditure. Now let us move further. Why did I analyze that number? I wanted to analyze that central number to give you some idea कि बजट दिखने में बहुत बड़ा है, लेकिन जब हम उसको एनालाइज करते हैं तो हमें पता लगेगा इसमें से आधा पैसा तो ऐसी जगह जा रहा है जिसका कोई बेनिफिट नहीं होता. दिस इज व्हाट आई वांटेड टू एक्सप्लेन कि बजट का नंबर बहुत बड़ा दिखता है, सुनने में लगता है अरे 45 लाख करोड़, कितने जीरो होंगे उसमें, हम कैसे गिने इसको, बहुत बड़ा अमाउंट दिखता है, लेकिन उसका एक बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा ऐसी जगह खर्च हो रहा है जिसका कोई बेनिफिट इकोनॉमी को नहीं होता. वी वांट टू रिड्यूस दैट. वी वांट आवर बजट टू बी बिग, but this big budget should be spent on creation of assets, should be spent on providing public goods, कि सबको पावर मिले, सबको पानी मिले, सबको अच्छी क्वालिटी का इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर मिले. हम ये चाहते हैं. तो ये पैसा बजाय इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट के, ये पैसा खर्च हो अच्छी यूनिवर्सिटीज बनने के लिए, ये पैसा खर्च हो काफी अच्छे स्कूल्स बनने के लिए, हॉस्पिटल्स बनने के लिए, सड़कें बनने के लिए. That is what we want. Now, let us look at everything individually once more. So, let us talk about the receipts, the earnings. So, if we look at the receipt, then the receipt is roughly 27 lakh crore rupees, roughly $330 billion. Okay, and this receipt includes tax as well as non-tax. So, we just saw. There also I told you 27 is the rough number, 23 point something was the tax and rest was the non-tax. So this is the overall number, and in total this is $330 billion. Remember our total budget is $550 billion. हमारा खर्च है $550 बिलियन, लेकिन हमारी कमाई है सिर्फ $350 बिलियन. बाकी का पैसा हमें या तो उधार लेना पड़ रहा है या बाकी का पैसा हमें कुछ सरकारी कंपनियों को बेचकर इकट्ठा करना पड़ रहा है. दैट इज माई प्रॉब्लम. दैट इज समथिंग आई रियली वांट टू हाईलाइट वेरी क्लियरली. नाउ लेट अस गेट इनटू सम मोर टेक्निकल एनालिसिस. ओके, सो वी डू हैव अ बिग बजट, बट actual earning and spending on ground for useful purposes is much lesser. Now, this good thing over here is that proportion of this is improving faster. The tax income is improving fast. अच्छी बात क्या है कि proportion जो है वो useful वाले खर्चे का बढ़ रहा है. The useful expenditure is improving. So now there is increase of almost 12% in the receipts of the government. Now, let us look at the breakup here. The corporate tax, income tax, okay, the direct taxes, they are growing around 10.5%, which is a decent number. The excise duty has grown by 5.9%, and GST is growing this year by more than 12%, which is an excellent number. And we expect nominal GDP growth of 10.5% in 2023-24. The nominal GDP growth includes inflation, and the real GDP growth that we expect is about 7%. Remember, nominal is 10.5, but the real growth that we expect would be about 7%. So there is a difference between real and nominal. Now, what is this chart? This chart talks about how much is the tax revenue, how much is the non-tax revenue, how much is the non-debt capital receipt. If we leave the loans, then from where the rest of the money is coming. So you can see here how fast our tax income has improved. So if you see here, somewhere around in 2015-16, the total income of government was roughly 12.5 lakh crore rupees. Today this number has improved to 27 lakh crore rupees. Okay, and how much time has gone by in between? almost 6 or almost 7 years. In 7 years, this number has more than doubled. And particularly from 2020 onward, we see massive improvement in the tax number. Okay? Particularly, there are two big jumps. So, what we were criticizing earlier, हम जो पहले बात कर रहे थे कि टैक्स इनकम कम है और काफी सारा पैसा लोन के रूप में आ रहा है. इन फ्यूचर भविष्य में हो सकता है इनकम टैक्स से हमें काफी पैसा मिलने लगे, क्योंकि अभी जो ट्रेंड है वो शो कर रहा है कि इनकम टैक्स और जीएसटी टैक्स वो काफी अच्छे प्रकार से बढ़ रहे हैं. दैट इज ए गुड थिंग. वी डू हैव सम प्रॉब्लम्स. ओके, we have to understand our problem, we have to highlight those problems, but we also need to understand if there are good changes, we understand them. The good change for us is our tax income is growing fast. Now, from income we come to expenditure. If you look at the expenditure side, then broadly, this 45 lakh crore rupees, I discussed this number on the first page. Roughly $550 billion is the overall expenditure. Now, increasing this number is about 7.5%. Okay, and in comparison to this, now look at this number. हमारा खर्च बढ़ा है 7.5%, लेकिन हमारी इनकम बढ़ी है 10%. This is good thing. मेरी इनकम मेरे खर्च से तेजी से बढ़ रही है. My income is growing faster than my expenditure. So in future, this gap will be covered if we continue like this. This is a positive sign I was trying to highlight. So we do have problem. समस्या है, किंतु अब वो समाधान की तरफ चल रही है. समस्या बढ़ नहीं रही है, समस्या घट रही है. Again, as I simplify it and highlight it. This is a good number that you can talk about. Now, how you can use this information in examination? Let us see in the examination, question comes on India's debt levels. Question comes on India's high deficit. Let us say there is a question that India's finances are unsustainable, or India's macroeconomic situation is unsustainable or unstable. Where do you think Indian economy, how do you think Indian economy will continue to grow as we project it to become the third largest economy by 2027? So over there you can very easily talk about this trend, that even though our debt is high, our deficit is high, the good thing is that was a temporary phase because of the COVID and some of the other problems. When we launched GST, then initially GST did not give us good income. Okay, so in 2017 we launched GST. The GST rollout was not as per our expectation. So we were expecting good income from GST, but GST had certain issues. So for first 3 years, GST did not give us income. From 2017 to 2020, GST did not give us much income and we had to take more loans. From 2020, we were affected by COVID. We had to take even more loans after that. So पिछले 5 सालों में 2017 से 2022 तक हमने बहुत ज्यादा लोन लिए. क्यों? क्योंकि GST के कारण हमारी इनकम काफी कम हो गई थी और बाद में कोविड के कारण हमें और ज्यादा नुकसान उठाना पड़ा. किंतु अब पिछले 2 साल में जीएसटी बहुत अच्छी तरह से ग्रो किया है. नाउ इन द लास्ट 2 years जीएसटी has grown really very well and it is giving us income. So that is a good sign. There you can talk about this thing, that now our income is growing faster than our expenditure, and which is a positive side. That means in future all these debt, deficit, etc. are decreasing and the income is increasing sustainably. So we can really hope that our macroeconomic numbers are going to improve in future, and that is how you answer. Okay. Now, after we have discussed this number, let us look at some of the other aspects. Out of the total expenditure, the revenue expenditure is estimated to be about 35,000 crore. Okay, and capital expenditure is about 10,000 crore. Okay, 10 lakh crore. So what is the proportion now? 35 and 10, and total expenditure is 45. So that means the capital expenditure is now roughly about 14%, 13% to 14% of the overall expenditure. And we'll talk more about this capital expenditure. What is revenue expenditure and what is capital expenditure? As I told you about the revenue receipt, let us briefly discuss that also. So revenue expenditure is your expenditure on routine items, routine entries, where it is capital expenditure with which you create new assets. रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर वो एक्सपेंडिचर है जो हम रूटीन आइटम्स पे, मतलब स्टाफ की सैलरी देनी, मिलिट्री का एक्सपेंडिचर, बिल्डिंग्स का मेंटेनेंस, सरकारी स्कीम का खर्चा, ये वो खर्चा जो हर साल होगा. इस खर्चे से हम डेवलपमेंट नहीं कर रहे. रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर डज नॉट क्रिएट डेवलपमेंट. डेवलपमेंट इज डन बाय कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर. कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इज द वन विच क्रिएट्स द एसेट्स. नई सड़कें बनना, नए स्कूल कॉलेज बनना, नए पावर प्लांट बनना, ब्रिजेस बनना, बांध बनना, ये सब कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर के अंडर होते हैं. नई लैबोरेटरी खुलना, रिसर्च में खर्च होना, ये सब कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर के थ्रू होता है. सो इट इज कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर विच मैटर्स मोर. And the good thing is our capital expenditure used to be about 6% of the total expenditure. Now this has more than doubled. From 6% we have come to a stage of 14% of capital expenditure. And in addition there are some more positive signs. So this is also a very good positive development that you can identify. Increase in capital expenditure is the highlight of this budget. Okay. So the increase in capital expenditure is due to an increase in the capital outlay. Okay. Is due to increase in capital outlay on the transport. Okay, for example, this year we have given record amount of money for railways. So capital expenditure कहाँ होगा? रेलवे पे, रोड पे, ब्रिजेस पे, okay, बंदरगाह बनने पे, पोर्ट्स बनने में, वाटर ट्रांसपोर्ट में. So इस साल हमने रेलवे को बहुत पैसा दिया है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, रेलवे अलोन has got 1.28 lakh crore rupees. This much amount of money we have given to railways. So इससे क्या होगा? रेलवे के नए ट्रैक्स बनेंगे, नई वंदे भारत ट्रेन चलेंगी. So this is what leads to the development. More jobs will be created. The dedicated freight corridor will be speeded up. The rapid rail transport network will be speeded up. इससे ये काम होगा. रैपिड रेल जल्दी चलेगी, बुलेट ट्रेन जल्दी चलेगी, फ्राइट कॉरिडोर जल्दी बनेगा, ट्रेनों की स्पीड बढ़ेगी, सुविधाएं बढ़ेंगी. This is what happens with capital expenditure. Okay. Now let us look at the next slide. Now let us come to the capital expenditure, which is the highlight of this budget. If there is one particular point to talk about this budget, it is the capital expenditure. So capital expenditure is the money spent by government on the development of machinery, equipment, building, health facilities, education, etc. Okay, this line alone tells you the importance of the capital expenditure. Okay, so capital expenditure is, you can understand, a good expenditure which leads to development of the country. From the total expenditure, it is capital expenditure which is towards development. Now, something which I wanted to highlight, that our actual capital expenditure from center might be only 10 लाख करोड़. हमने क्या बताया था? 45 लाख करोड़ में से 10 लाख करोड़ हम लोग कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर की तरफ खर्च कर रहे हैं. बट लेकिन ये सिर्फ 10 लाख करोड़ नहीं है. सेंटर ने स्टेट को भी लगभग 4 लाख करोड़ रुपया कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर पे खर्च करने के लिए दिया है, इसी 45 में से. सो फ्रॉम 45 लाख करोड़ रुपीस, सेंटर हैज एडिशनली अलॉटेड almost 4 lakh crore rupees or 3.7 lakh crore rupees also to the states for capital expenditure. So total capital expenditure is not 10 lakh crore, it is 13.7 lakh crore, and that makes it 19% of the total expenditure. मैंने पहले क्या बताया था कि हमारा डेवलपमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर मतलब हम 100 रुपए खर्च करते थे, 100 रुपए में से सिर्फ 6 रुपए डेवलपमेंट के लिए खर्च होते थे, 33 रुपए हम पहले ब्याज भरते थे पुराने लोन का, और बाकी पैसा लगभग 60 रुपए हमारा खर्च होता था सरकारी डिपार्टमेंट पे, स्टाफ पे, बिल्डिंग पे, मटेरियल पे, मिलिट्री पे। अब इसमें क्या डिफरेंस आया, अगर हम 100 रुपए खर्च कर रहे हैं उसमें से 19 रुपए अब डेवलपमेंट के लिए खर्च होंगे। दिस इज ए वेरी बिग चेंज। आप 6 रुपए की जगह 19 रुपए अगर डेवलपमेंट पे खर्च करेंगे तो डेवलपमेंट का स्पीड बहुत तेज होगा, एंड दिस इज व्हाट इज वेरी पॉजिटिव। नाउ लेट अस मूव अहेड. So this effective capital expenditure is a very important data. Okay, you should highlight it. In case a question tends to this category, that what government is doing or what is the reason Indian economy is likely to do well, or why Indian economy is doing well, or why we expect Indian economy to do well, it question can come in any aspect. You talk about this, that not only private sector is spending for development, government also is spending a lot on development. Today, almost 1 rupee out of 5, almost 20% of our expenditure, roughly 19%, let us say, is spent on the capital expenditure. So this is what makes the big difference. Highlight of the budget. Now, let us look at the detail of this capital expenditure. मैं जब से बार बार बोल रहा हूं कि हमने डेवलपमेंट खर्च बढ़ा दिया, ये डेवलपमेंट अब कहां खर्च होगा, डेवलपमेंट खर्च हमारा किस जगह पे खर्च होगा. Let us talk about where this capital expenditure is going to be spent. So for example, this year the railway capital expenditure is almost 2.4 trillion rupees, which is almost 9 times compared to 2013 and highest ever so far. If we compare it to 10 years ago, 10 साल पुराना अगर हम बजट देखें, तब के मुकाबले हम रेलवे पर आज ऑलमोस्ट लगभग 9 गुना ज्यादा पैसा खर्च कर रहे हैं. और ये रेलवे पर खर्च नहीं हो रहा है, ये रेलवे के स्टाफ की सैलरी की बात नहीं हो रही, ये रेलवे के विकास पर होने वाले खर्च की बात हो रही है. सो फॉर रेलवे डेवलपमेंट दिस मच वी आर स्पेंडिंग 9 times compared to 10 years ago. Then government has also extended 50-year interest-free loans to the states in case they are spending for infrastructure investment. If a state want to create road, want to create power plant, want to invest in infrastructure, then that state can get 50-year interest-free loan, and this amount is 1.3 trillion rupees, which is 1.3 lakh crore. Okay, this is additional amount available for capital investment. Means we have earlier seen 13.7 lakh crore plus 1.3, exactly 15 lakh crore rupees are now allocated for development. This is also an additional fund apart from the other budget that we have allotted for development. Now we can see that 15 out of 45 is meant for the capital expenditure, which is a very, very big number. Now, coming back here, to improve the logistics, okay, so after railway, after those infrastructure loans, we're talking about transport sector. Logistics is roughly similar to transport. So for logistics also we are spending a lot of money here for 100 critical transport infrastructure projects. Logistics is transport infrastructure. Okay, and then there are 50 additional airports and helipads and water aerodromes that we are going to create. So a big amount is also going to be spent for creation of more helipads, aerodromes and airports. Similarly, coastal shipping, urban infrastructure development fund, which is going to improve the urban infrastructure in smaller cities. And similarly, artificial intelligence research and laboratories for 5G services research. Okay, these are also some additional expenditure that we are going to do from the capital side. तो ये कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर कहां खर्च करने वाले हैं? रेल पे, रोड पे, लॉजिस्टिक्स पे, which is basically transport. Then we are going to spend it on shipping. We are going to spend it on creation of airports. We are going to spend it on urban infrastructure. Okay. We are going to spend it for research on the artificial intelligence. We are going to spend it on research for 5G services. And in addition, we are going to spend a certain amount of money or a significant amount of money in improving the nursing infrastructure in this country. What is nursing infrastructure? So for example, wherever we have medical colleges in India, in all the medical colleges, nursing colleges will also be attached. Not all medical colleges in India have nursing colleges. Nursing is a specific art. Okay, and COVID taught us that healthcare workforce is critical. And there is nothing which can replace them, which can create alternatives for that. So creation of nursing staff is very important if we want to improve our healthcare services. So in all the medical colleges in the country, we have identified in 157 locations, we will have the new nursing colleges. Okay. And since 2014, we have set up 157 medical colleges. So with all of those medical colleges, we are going to set up these nursing colleges. मतलब 2014 से हमने 157 मेडिकल कॉलेज खोले. अब हर मेडिकल कॉलेज के साथ एक नर्सिंग कॉलेज भी खुलेगा. So these are all the capital expenditure details. Details are much more than this, but for that you have to read the budgetary document. We cannot cover each and every line of the budget here. We are trying to cover the highlight. We are trying to identify from where questions are possible. So questions are likely to be on the development side. Questions are likely to be on the big size of budget, but a very big amount of loans, a very big amount of interest payments. Okay. These 2 points have already highlighted adequately. Next. Now we come to the loans and the deficit. मतलब budget घाटा और total debt to GDP ratio. Now, let us look at this number. Our deficit, मतलब budget घाटा, that used to be 4.7% in 2019-20. Means if we were spending 100 rupees, 4 rupees or 5 rupees out of that we had to take loan. But in 2020-21, this became 9% of, not 5 rupees, sorry, my bad. If we were spending, let me redo this analysis, sorry, I explained it wrongly. This is in percentage of GDP, not in percentage of budget expenditure. So let me explain in that manner only. So if we were spending 16 rupees, okay, let us say budget expenditure was 16 rupees of GDP. Out of 16, 5 or 4.7 was in the form of loan. This year, our expenditure increased to almost 19%. And almost half of this money came from the loan only. Out of 9.2% is the loan. Okay. And similarly, now we can see COVID increased our fiscal deficit. मतलब कोविड के कारण हमारा बजट घाटा बहुत अधिक बढ़ा. अब ये बजट घाटा एक बार नहीं बढ़ता. एक बार बजट घाटा बढ़ेगा, आने वाले कई साल को उसका असर पड़ता है. When your budget deficit increases one time, it will impact at least next 5 years. हमने आज एक बहुत बड़ा लोन लिया क्योंकि इस साल हमें प्रॉब्लम है, मान लीजिए कोविड है, और उसकी वजह से हमने एक बहुत बड़ा लोन लिया. अब अगले 10 साल तक हम उस लोन को पे भी तो करेंगे. अगले 10 साल तक मुझे जितना ब्याज भरना पड़ेगा, मेरा वो खर्च भी तो बढ़ गया. अगले साल हो सकता है मैं लोन कम लूं, लेकिन सिर्फ उस ब्याज को, एक्स्ट्रा ब्याज का जो बर्डन मुझ पे इसकी वजह से आया, सिर्फ उसको भरने के लिए मुझे बहुत ज्यादा एक्स्ट्रा लोन लेना पड़ेगा. सो लेट मी रिपीट इट इन इंग्लिश नाउ. द fiscal deficit is 4.5% on average before the COVID. COVID increased it to more than double to 9.2% of the GDP. This is a huge number. मतलब उस साल हमें लगभग $300 बिलियन का लोन लेना पड़ा. This year we have taken almost $140 billion of loan, but that year we were maybe something like $270 billion of loan we had to take that time. Okay. Now because we took that much big amount of loan, its interest payment, its interest burden is also huge on the coming years. Since interest burden is huge on this year, even this year and this year also, and even in this year, we have to take more loan than what we wanted. So this is exactly what we are trying to highlight here. So we expect our fiscal deficit to be 5.8% or 5.7% next year. This year, this is revised to be 6.4%. Last year, it was 6.7%, and prior to that, it was 9.2%. So, likewise, our deficit is falling. This is a good thing. We had to take a very big loan because of COVID. But since then, we have reduced our loans. This big loan will have impact on some coming years, but we are reducing the amount of loan every year. Next year, I mean by 2024-25, we have a target by 2024-25, we have a target of 4.5% of the deficit. So we will come back again to the pre-COVID situation by next year. मतलब कोविड का एक साल वो हमारे आने वाले 4 साल तक उसका फर्क पड़ा. प्री कोविड सिचुएशन में आने के लिए हमें लगभग 5 साल लग गए. दिस इज व्हाट वी आर ट्राइंग टू हाईलाइट. कोविड से पहले हमारा बजट घाटा 4.5%, वो भी ज्यादा है, किंतु कोविड के कारण हमें बहुत बड़ा लोन लेना पड़ा क्योंकि टैक्स इनकम भी कम है, खर्च ज्यादा है. अब क्योंकि इस साल हमने बहुत बड़ा खर्च किया, उसकी वजह से आने वाले 4 साल पे इंटरेस्ट बर्डन बढ़ गया. सो धीरे धीरे कम होते होते वो अगले साल वो आकर वापस पुरानी सिचुएशन पे आएगा. सो दैट मींस क्राइसिस लाइक कोविड डू नॉट अफेक्ट योर वन बजट, इट अफेक्ट 3 to 4 बजट्स एट लीस्ट इन द कमिंग टाइम. ओनली इन द 5th year from COVID we are going to be pre-COVID in terms of the fiscal deficit. That is what I'm trying to highlight. So this is the long-term impact. So this you should use in your answer. Let us say question comes on economic impact of COVID, which is very much possible now. You should talk about it. That COVID impact is not for 1 or 2 years. It affects 4 or 5 years of your economy. And that is a very big drag on the economic performance. मतलब कोविड ने हमें सिर्फ 1 साल पीछे नहीं किया, उसने हमें कई साल पीछे कर दिया. Now, coming back here, the revenue deficit in next year is expected to be 2.9% of GDP, and the fiscal deficit is expected to be 5.9%. Sorry, I mentioned 5.8. This is targeted to be 5.9% of the GDP, and previous year it was 6.4%. So next year we are expecting the deficits to fall. The current deficit level that we expect in the next budget, current deficit level is 4.1% of GDP. In the next budget we expect it to be 2.9. Similarly here the current is 6.4. Next year we expect 5.9% of the GDP. Okay. Now, outstanding liabilities, which is same as the debt to GDP ratio. अभी तक हम बात कर रहे थे बजट घाटे की, अब हम बात करेंगे टोटल सरकार के ऊपर कितना लोन है. What is the total liability of the government? The total liability of the government was about 51% in 2012-13. And it reduced to 48% in 2018-19. It was in fact 46% in 2016-17, I remember. It is because of the GST that our revenue were less and this increased. Anyways, the point is the debt to GDP ratio was about 51% in 2012. मतलब हमारी टोटल इनकम का 51% हमारे ऊपर लोन था, जो कि घट के लगभग 46% हुआ था 2016-17 में. We had 51% of the debt to GDP ratio, which reduced to almost 46% by 2016-17, and then it slightly increased to 48%. But you know how much COVID increased that? COVID increased that to almost 61%. In 2020-21, this increased to 6.1%, 61%, not 6.1. Now, this reduced to 57% next year, and we are expecting it to remain around 57% only in the coming year also. So this is the analysis of our debt. जो हमारे ऊपर टोटल लोन है वो कोविड के टाइम पे 61%, 61% हो गया था, जो घट के 57% हो गया. And we are talking about central government only. If we talk about overall center plus state, then this burden increased to almost 84% of the GDP, which is now reduced to roughly 80% of the GDP. So this is what we are talking about. Okay. So we have seen what is the debt and deficit level. Debt is your overall debt to GDP ratio, and deficit is how much in one particular year you are borrowing. Debt, how much you have borrowed overall over time. Now, subsidy expenditure. So this year we expect subsidy expenditure to reduce substantially. This is what I wanted to highlight. So we expect subsidy expenditure to reduce to 28%. Okay, and this is because due to COVID, we increased the food subsidy substantially. Last year also we extended the food subsidy substantially, but now we expect it to go down in the coming time, even though we have extended the certain food subsidies programs. Okay, so next year the food subsidy is expected to be about 30% lower than the previous year expenditure. Okay, so bulk of this cut is coming from food subsidy cut. Okay, and then the fertilizer subsidy. So fertilizer subsidy is also decreasing by 22%, and this is also because of Russia-Ukraine war. So Russia and Ukraine, they are very big suppliers of wheat. Then they are very big suppliers of fuel, okay, petroleum. And then the third product which they supply is fertilizer. Okay, they are also very big supplier of oil seeds, by the way. They are big producer of sunflower oil. But nonetheless, let us talk about these three. Last year, in 2022, there was a massive event of Russia-Ukraine war, which all of you students should be aware of. Now, in this Russia-Ukraine war, the prices of wheat, the prices of petroleum, and the prices of fertilizer increased a lot. But now the prices have moderated in all the categories. That is why we expect fertilizer subsidy to go down. It's not that government is reducing or cutting the fertilizer subsidy. The fertilizer subsidy was particularly higher last year because of Russia-Ukraine war. In fact, that was the reason why we could not achieve some of our fiscal deficit targets for previous year. Why our revenue deficit was higher in the previous year. Previous year as in the year that is going on, because budget is the next year. And then the other subsidies, okay, over there if we see, there is no decrease. Okay, next, now we are going to talk about the policy highlights. We've already discussed all the datas. And all those data are what that matters, the long-term trends in the macroeconomic health of the country. So we should understand how much we are spending, but out of that spending, how much we have to borrow, how much we are actually spending on ground, how much we are paying just as interest, how much we are spending for development. All those breakups I have given you. Then how much is the loss in the budget? How much is the total burden on the government? That also we have seen. Now let us talk about the policy highlights. How much this budget has announced regarding the new policies and the developments. So if we talk about the policy highlights, then regarding the legislative changes, the legal changes, it is the Banking Regulation Act which will be changed. Okay, so there will be certain broader changes will be regarding the banking which will be made, and that is to improve the banking governance and to improve the investors' confidence in the banking. Now, apart from legislative developments, if we talk about infrastructure development, then we have already discussed that there is a program to provide interest-free 50-year loan to the states and with an outlay of 1.3 lakh crore rupees. So we have discussed it. So this will be available for 100 critical transport infrastructure. This is next point. There are 100 critical transport infrastructure projects. We have already covered this actually when we were talking about capital expenditure. Then urban development also we have discussed. Okay. So those were actually your policy highlights as well, that what we are really going to do this year. So for example, we discussed that this much for railway, this much for airports. For example, 50 new airports or helipads or aerodromes we are going to create. Likewise, urban infrastructure. Okay, similarly, the MSME credit guarantee scheme. So due to COVID, the government provided MSME credit guarantee scheme. And a lot of companies actually took benefit of that. COVID के कारण जब फैक्ट्रियां बंद पड़ गई थी, तब छोटी छोटी फैक्ट्री के मालिक, MSME का मतलब ही होता है माइक्रो स्मॉल एंड मीडियम एंटरप्राइजेस, बहुत छोटे छोटे यूनिट, मीडियम साइज की यूनिट और बहुत माइक्रो साइज की यूनिट्स, इस तरह की कंपनीज जब बंद पड़ी, इस तरह की फैक्ट्रीज जब लॉकडाउन के कारण काम नहीं कर पा रही थी, तब काफी सारी फैक्ट्रीज के सामने एक सवाल खड़ा हो गया था अस्तित्व का, कि वो भविष्य में काम भी कर पाएंगे या नहीं, क्योंकि 3-4 महीने अगर फैक्ट्री बंद रह जाएगी तो उसका लॉस इतना अधिक होगा कि छोटी कंपनी तो बंद हो जाएगी. So the point is, if an MSME unit is going to be shut down for 2 to 3 months, then it will have such big losses that it can't even sustain. So in order to support such small companies, government extended a credit line of 9,000 crore rupees. Okay. So this was provided during COVID, and since then government is extending that service. And by the way, a lot of small companies took the benefit of that. इस स्कीम के अंदर बहुत सारी छोटी कंपनीज ने लोन लिए और वापस भी किए. सो ये स्कीम एक अच्छा स्टेप था जो स्मॉल कंपनीज के सर्वाइवल के लिए काफी कारगर सिद्ध हुआ. नेक्स्ट पॉलिसी हाईलाइट. नाउ there is a agriculture accelerator fund that we are going to set up. Okay, and similarly there will be a sub scheme under the PM Matsya Sampada Yojana, which will be about the processing of the fish. Okay, which will be with a support of 6,000 crore rupees investment. Okay, and that is going to support a lot of fishermen, MSME and fish vendors. So this is going to be a game changer for fisheries. Similarly, the PM program for restoration, awareness, nourishment for Mother Earth, PM Pranam, that will be launched. It will be a new scheme called PM Pranam. Okay, they really come up with very interesting name, by the way. PM program for restoration, awareness, nourishment and amelioration of Mother Earth. Really interesting name. Will be launched to incentivize the states and the UTs to promote the balanced use of the chemical fertilizers and alternative fertilizers. And then there is green credit program for energy and environment. Okay, and then there is research and development. Okay, so 100 labs for 5G, and then nursing colleges I've already discussed. Then there is interesting and very important scheme to address the sickle cell anemia. Anemia is when you have lack of red blood cell in your blood, and that creates critical illness. And one particular type of anemia is sickle cell anemia, when the red blood cell, they get deformed, okay, their shape, they get twisted and they get the sickle like shape, okay. So rather than round shape or this oval shape, they roughly get this type of shape like sickle. So that is sickle cell anemia. Perhaps I'm not 100% correct on this shape, but broadly that is why it is called sickle cell anemia. So this is a very critical illness and India has very high proportion of it. And this is also one of the reasons why we have very high child mortality. We have very poor child nutrition records. We have high stunting, wasting, etc. So this also needs to be addressed, and for that there is a big budget which is allocated this year. So these are all specific programs development. Now, I have not discussed income tax here, that there is some change in income tax. Frankly, for UPSC, this does not matter. इस तरह के क्वेश्चन नहीं आते हैं कि अभी कितना स्लैब है, किस इनकम टैक्स का कितना रेट है, कभी भी यूपीएससी में इस तरह का क्वेश्चन नहीं आता है. So even though everybody is talking about income tax, it is not very important for you. Only thing you need to understand is the difference between the new income tax scheme and the old income tax scheme. What is this new versus old income tax scheme? Okay. So old scheme is where everybody was originally registered. In the old scheme, we have certain tax incentives in the form of ATC, ATCC and some other provisions. For example, if you invest into insurance products, for example, if you put your money in health insurance, if you save money, then you get tax incentive. That much proportion of your spending is not taxed. Government give you incentive. So all these incentives were given in past to encourage the savings in the country. हमने ये इंसेंटिव पहले इसलिए दिए थे ताकि लोग पैसा ज़्यादा सेव करें, लोग इंश्योरेंस खरीदें, अपनी बुढ़ापे के लिए, अपने बुरे समय के लिए वो बचत करें. सो इसीलिए कभी किसी समय पे इस तरह के बहुत सारे प्रोग्राम्स और इंसेंटिव दिए गए थे. So we had a lot of these incentives in the old scheme. But now there is an argument this old scheme benefits certain specific people. And it forces a lot of people to put money into insurance unnecessarily. And then it is also very complicated because it has a lot of extra provisions. House rent allowance, it has a lot of additional, let us say, allowances specifically for interest payment on the home loan, let us say. That is an additional benefit available worth 50,000 rupees. Okay? Health insurances. So it makes the calculation very complicated. The new scheme does not give you any incentive. In the new scheme, the tax rate is less. Okay? For example, in the old scheme, above 10 lakh rupees, you have 30% tax. But in the new scheme, it is above 15 lakh rupees that you have 30% tax. So that means over here you pay less tax already. If your income is 15 lakh rupees, you save more in the new scheme rather than the old scheme. This is what government is saying. So some people are still very familiar with the old scheme and they want to continue with the old scheme. That is why government did not force it on people. So like GST, it was a major tax reform, but rather than forcing it on people, government gave two options. Slowly, government will migrate more people to new scheme by giving lesser taxes here. And eventually, when very few people will be left in old scheme, then it will be removed someday. And that is a better way of introducing reforms, by the way. Okay. So this is your old versus new. नई स्कीम में टैक्स रेट कम है, किंतु जितने भी ATC और LIC, इंश्योरेंस, होम लोन और हाउस रेंट, ये सब अलाउंस मिलते थे, वो सब इसमें कुछ नहीं मिलेंगे. But your tax itself is already low. So people who do not save in insurance products, for them the new scheme is more attractive. And now since government has also announced that people who earn up to 7 lakh rupees and they register under new scheme, they do not have to pay any tax. So that is also an additional incentive. So that is all about the new versus old scheme. But by the way, those tax rate are not important for you. You just need to understand it as a tax reform. And it is not a new tax reform. It was already done in 2019 after the election. So now some additional data. Okay, just 2-3 minutes we are going to spend on rest of the discussion. The discussion on the budget is largely complete. Now I'm coming to some of the additional survey data. So how much is the growth of agriculture? In 2022-23, the growth of agriculture is now expected to be 3.5%. Previous year it was 3, prior to that it was 3.3. So it is doing pretty well. If agriculture grows above 3, it is considered a good sign. If agriculture grows between 2.5 to 3, it is considered as somewhat average performance or less than expected. 3 is the benchmark, and if it is less than 2.5% growth, then it is disappointing. That is the benchmark for agriculture growth. And if it is above 3.5, then that is even more excellent. So this is about the growth. Why do have 5.5 in this particular year? That was a particular bumper crop. Okay, and also increase in the agriculture prices in certain areas. Now let us talk about industrial growth. So industrial growth this year is likely to be about 4.1%, and the services growth is likely to be about 9.1%. So this is about agriculture, industry and services. The industrial growth is a bit disappointing. We were expecting better industrial growth this year, but then there are a lot of factors. For example, the Russia-Ukraine war has greatly affected the international trade. The export-oriented units in India are not doing well. So there are challenges, and significant challenges actually. And then exporters also had challenges regarding too much changes in the currency exchange rate. That also was a problem. So our industrial performance is a bit disappointing. Rest services did pretty well, and agriculture also did pretty well. And then some of the other data, the average of the first 6 months or first 8 months of 2022-23 is this. The WPI average is 11.5, CPI average is 6.8. The inflation is high. Inflation was high last year. But the good sign is now, by the end of December, the WPI number has fallen greatly. This is average. This is higher. Okay, and why this WPI is particularly very high here? All of you must have heard of supply side constraints. Okay, raw material not available. That increased the problem. For example, if we talk about car industry, there are certain raw materials, particularly microchips for car industry, which were simply not available. Car companies were ready to pay even up to 4 times for those chips, but they were in shortage. And when something is in shortage, you can't really do too much about it. So the component prices increased too much. And that is the reason why cost of production increased a lot. WPI reflects the changes in cost of production. Cost of production. Whereas CPI reflects the changes in cost of consumption. Okay. Now WPI is not a very perfect measure for cost of production, by the way. In future, we want to shift to something called PPI, Producer Price Index. That would be a perfect measure or much better measure for cost of production. WPI is not a very good measure for this also. So that is a proper independent topic which takes a lot of time, not possible to explore that completely in budget. So I'm not going in that detail. But to simplify WPI, CPI for everyone, WPI is wholesale price index. मतलब फैक्ट्री से जब होलसेलर के पास माल बिकता है तब उसमें क्या चेंज आ रहा है। एक फैक्ट्री के लेवल पे प्राइस जो है वो कॉस्ट से डिटरमाइन होता है। सो जनरली WPI रिफ्लेक्ट्स द कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन, but we have better measurement for that called PPI. But this shift require a lot of other changes in the data series. So perhaps after next election, it is expected government will adopt PPI, the producer price index, which will be a better indicator. So we should, rather than having CPI WPI, we should have CPI, which reflects cost of consumption. मतलब मुझे कुछ कंज्यूम करना है, मुझे अपने लिए कुछ चाहिए एज ए कस्टमर, तो उसके लिए मेरा खर्च कितना बढ़ रहा है। और पीपीआई मेजर करेगा एक प्रोड्यूसर, एक फैक्ट्री का मालिक अगर एक्स्ट्रा प्रोड्यूस कर रहा है तो उसका खर्च कितना बढ़ रहा है। दोनों इंडिकेटर इंपॉर्टेंट होंगे। सो देयर शुड नॉट बी अ वेरी बिग गैप इन इट, एंड सिंस रॉ मटेरियल सप्लाई वाज ए चैलेंज, WPI वाज वेरी हाई थ्रू आउट दिस पीरियड, बट नाउ फॉर्चुनेटली the WPI has fallen significantly. Now the supply side constraints are largely settled and the WPI is now much lower. CPI is also fallen below 6. It is now within the target range. So that is a good sign. Inflation went very high in between, but it has now fallen. It is now within the target range. And then if we talk about GDP growth, in 2022-23, we expected 7% growth, but that is not something we achieved because of Russia-Ukraine war. The international scenario changed and oil prices changed and a lot of other impacts were there on Indian economy. So our growth reduced. Okay, and last year, this year, we are expecting as the year finishes, we will get something like 6.1% growth. And this is a data from survey, and survey projects this growth to be 6.0 to 6.8 for next year. Whereas budget has placed this number to be about 7%. And if we talk about foreign exchange reserves, this year our foreign exchange reserves also decreased because of the increase in the dollar value and increase in the American Fed rates. So there is a concept called taper tantrum. Whenever the American government or American Federal Bank or Federal Reserve increases the interest rates there, bond rates there, the money from world over rushes to USA. Okay, USA receives all the money from world, and that reduces the fund available with other countries. The exchange rate crashes. In order to support the exchange rate, RBI spent a lot of money, but still it is not a bad number. We are doing pretty well right now. Our current foreign exchange rate is somewhere close to $580 billion, okay, as of the 31st of January. So which is not very bad given the challenges. 2022 एक बहुत ही चैलेंज वाला साल था, और इस साल इतना सब कुछ चैलेंजेस फेस करने के बाद भी अगर हम 7% टारगेट की जगह 6.25% ग्रोथ ले लेते हैं, हम फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व में थोड़े से नुकसान के साथ इस साल को खत्म कर सकते हैं, तो ये एक अच्छी अचीवमेंट है। दिस इज व्हाट ऑल वी हैव टू डिस्कस अबाउट द बजट एंड द सर्वे डेटास। थैंक यू।